Okay, now we're recording. So far, made two spheres, one a geosphere and one a normal garden variety sphere, I guess. That is treated, the garden variety kind is treated like a latitude, longitude kind of Earth model, if you want to call it that. So we have rings going, so we have quad faces, if you want to call it that. Whereas the geosphere is triangulated faces. They both have advantages and disadvantages. Most of the time, the quad is kind of an easier one to work with, but not necessarily. The reasons for that will become apparent in future lessons. So there you go. However, yeah, so the question was, we can hit 7 on the keyboard, and we can look at the number of polygons. So in the scene, we can see each, we have 1,460 polygons. If I select an object, it doesn't really tell me any different, but I could right click it and go to its object properties. And this is where it can tell me how many vertices and how many faces. So right now, this garden variety sphere has 960 faces and has roughly the same smoothness, I would say, as our geosphere, right? Our triangulated model. And that has 500 faces. So fewer faces. It's just a more efficient model as far as that goes. So if I were making this for a game or something, I might use a geosphere if it's just a ball or something. So
what's the difference between film and video games for geospheres?
less and less, but the purpose here is, so the question is, I don't know if everybody heard that, but the question is, what's the difference between modeling for video that's seen on a big screen or modeling for video games, right? Well, one, video games are the screens being refreshed almost real time, right? Nearly as near to real time as you can is better for a game, right? So when you're playing the game. So your assets, like the spheres and the background and things like that, need to be as low a poly model, right? As low a number of polygons or faces as you can, and still look good, right? So there's a balance. There's a much tighter balance between looking good and being computationally efficient enough to refresh it that fast. Whereas in a movie, you can really jack up the number of faces or whatever to make it as smooth as possible and more realistic looking. And it doesn't matter because it doesn't really refresh any faster. It's just a smoother, high-res model that gets recorded into a video format anyway. So that really doesn't increase the number of pixels you use. So you can go to town on it, right? Although there is a point of diminishing returns where you can't tell any increase, you won't be able to perceive any better. So movies will, you don't want to go further than you need to because, well, the computer still has to work with that. So I don't know if that answered your question well enough.
No, it did. I mean, it was just like I was watching a Pixar film last night. It was a short film, and it was from the original way that they actually edited the Pixar films to now.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more difficult to understand.
Cameron, you had.
Will the geosphere affect the painting of the object?
Well, that's a good question too, and generally no. It can. Yeah.
I've seen the videos where they kind of pull open into a huge perspective and try to make it right next to her.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
So yeah, my answer remains the same. However, the different structure, because it's triangulated versus quads, does affect how you, if you want to do some subsurface kind of work on it. So
and I don't know when I missed it. How do you the geosphere over just here? Like got the sphere.
Geosphere and the sphere, they're right next to each other in the creek. Okay, good. Okay, so We can adjust or affect the individual underlying structure, like the number of faces and the number of edges and vertices. Those primarily make up what you see on the screen by their parameters, primarily, right? So I can look at, let's say, the regular garden variety sphere, and I can see how many segments, right? So left to right or around the sphere, I'm breaking it up into 32 segments. And I can increase that as well. And what it does is it increases the number of, well, longitude segments, which also increases the number of latitude segments, I guess, to keep it square. So roughly, each of these are kept square. So there. Okay, put that back down to 32. You can see that. So F4, that's right. So F4 turns the grid on or off your shading. F3 turns on and off the shading in any viewport, right? So by default, the orthographic or the left front top, those are orthographic viewports that don't give you any perspective distortion, which is good for a lot of reasons. Those are not shaded by default, but that doesn't mean you can't shade them, right? All right, good questions. Okay, let's go on. Let's, I don't know that I want to talk too much about these other ones. All of them have a slightly different way to create them. Let's look at cylinder, and boxes are kind of created the same way. You set out the base, right? So here's the cylinder. So I click out and it just gives me a circle, and then I let go of the mouse, and then I move the mouse again. So I let go of the mouse, right? Both hands up here. And then I move the mouse for the height. So you can put a negative height or a positive height on it, and then you just click once more to place or set the height. Of course, you can always look at the numeric values of each of those and edit those at any time, right? So even if I create another one, I can go back to this one, but I have to go back to the modify panel to get it. The create panel will tell you what the parameters are on an object you just created, but that goes away once you do something else, basically. So now, no matter what I do, selecting any of these objects, the create panel, the plus, right? That's called the create panel, is not going to show me the parameters for these objects, but the modify panel will on any of it. So, okay. Is that okay? So far, so good. Let's go back to the sphere for a minute. Let's place a modifier on this sphere. So I'm in the modify panel already, and I'll see this bar here, the modifier list. If I open the modifier list, I have some world space modifiers, but really I'm interested in the objects right now. So under object space modifiers, there is a few modifiers, and I'm not going to go over them all, but I'll just show you what they do generally. I'll use a noise modifier, I guess, to start this with. So I'll add a noise modifier to the sphere. I don't have the sphere selected. I have a cylinder selected, so let me click on the sphere first. Now I have the sphere selected, and I'll add the noise modifier to it. Nothing happens. However, I do see a box surrounding. That's called its modifier gizmo, and that gizmo can be edited. So if I twirl that noise modifier down, I can edit the gizmo, and I can actually move the gizmo, which affects how the noise is being applied to the sphere. But I'll keep it where it is, and I'll just simply edit some of the parameters for the noise modifier. So all these parameters, whatever you have selected, is what you edit. So right now the strength of this noise is at 0, so that's why I'm not seeing any change here. Let's magnify that a little bit. So let's add some strength to this. I don't know how big the sphere is here. I wasn't paying attention, but the radius is like 13 or 14, right? So if I put the strength to maybe half that, like let's try 6. It's a little less than half. Then I don't see much happening. However, the scale is over it's too big, basically. So what if I reduce the scale to like 1%? Okay, so that's maybe a little too small. But anyway, the noise is scaled down to 1% of the entire surface of the sphere, if that makes sense. So yeah, maybe a little bit higher to do that. And it's real sharp, right? I see a lot of sharp edges on this thing, right? I mean, it looks neat and everything, I guess, but it's not very smooth.
I got a weird question for you. Is there a way to like maybe you can animate that where like when you play it, it starts like showing like, exactly what like you messed around with and all that?
Yeah, nice question. Yes, you can animate these parameters. So, and it's the same way we animated the ball, right? So we can turn on, where is it? Turn on the auto key if you want. So now we're animating, and I can, you know, maybe I want to start with this amount of noise, or maybe I want to start with 100% scale here. So I can animate the scale, let's say. Actually, the phase would be better, so it'd look like it's undulating or something. But anyway, I'll just do scale for now. So right now, it's at 100. So maybe 30 frames later, that's 1 second by these set. And then I'll just change this number, right? It's back to like 5. So now I see 2 keyframes going on. So now if I slide between that, I can see the ball warping into that. So there. So if I want to turn that off and undo that, I can just go to animation and delete selected animation. And then I should be back to no animation on this ball or sphere. Good question. Nice.
Thank you.
So yeah, almost anything, even color, you can animate the color on something or whatever. So good. Okay, so like I mentioned before, I am not too happy with the results because it's all sharp. I have some sharp edges in there. So one thing to do is increasing the number of segments. And that gives me a finer resolution on more surfaces, more edges to bend or whatever. So let's increase that. Let's double that to 64. And I'm still getting some sharp edges, but a lot of it got smoothed out nicely. Right? So if I was going to take that close of a look, I'm getting some pinching up here. So probably, let's just take a look at what the geosphere is going to do under the same circumstances. So I'm going to select the geosphere. Well, actually, I'm just going to copy this noise modifier. So I can just right click it, copy, select the geosphere, right click it, paste, instanced. So instance means if I change one, they both change. A regular copy, like a paste, that means I can change one and the other one stays as a separate copy, which is less efficient as far as the computer is concerned, but there we go. So I get a more uniform surface with the geosphere. I'm still getting some sharp edges, but I only have like 500 faces on the geosphere. And on the regular garden variety sphere, what did I have? Up to 64, I have almost 4,000 faces. So this is where the geosphere is starting to shine a little bit more. In fact, if I go back down and I can increase this even more, I can get a far nicer, well, getting some sharpness going on because maybe I have too many faces. I could change the noise parameter a little bit, maybe increase the scale here or decrease the strength, maybe increase the scale to 10. Ooh, a little bit too high. Anyway, you can get the idea. Play with these numbers. Thought I could. Oh, and there's another, probably the better parameters to animate would be the animation settings here, but I'm not animating, so I'm not seeing any change. Okay. Another thing you can do is, so this is just general noise, but you can add the fractals to that. So you have noise inside the noise, basically. So it breaks that down into so many iterations. And this is where perhaps I would lower the strength of this just because I'm getting, let's put it at 2. So now I get a much nicer, well, it's not as deep, but it's at least not pinching the edges around on either one. So, except at the top, right? So where all those lines of longitude or whatever meet together, they're getting kind of pinched. So again, the geosphere is a better way to go for that kind of thing. Okay, good. So there's lots of other modifiers that we can play with, or I mean work with. So I'm just going to delete these, clear out the screen and do some more. How about I'll make a, yeah, let's just make a cylinder. Nice big cylinder. Zoom out, make it kind of tall. Maybe not that big. So that's pretty good. Okay, and I think we did this before. I'm not sure if I remember. Let's add a bend modifier. Remember we did a bend? Did we do that in here?
You're the one who prepared.
I just showed you only.
Well, you showed everybody, but
Oh, okay. So let's go into that a little bit more then. So yeah. So here's the bend modifier, and it's on the z-axis. So that's just up and down. So if I change the angle, I can edit the bend of it, right? And that can be animated as well. Wave. Okay. You can also animate or change the direction, which way it's going, right? So there's that. If I try a different axis, might get some interesting results. There's a bend on the x-axis, bend on the y-axis, which interesting as well. Make a cam profile out of that, maybe. Okay. Go back to Z. This depends also on the number of, and we talked about this before too. I only have 5, I'll hit F4, 5 height segments on this. So if I lower that number a little bit, you can kind of, it won't bend at all. It'll just kind of lean or skew, right? So I add more bends to it, and that'll give it a better smoothness of that bend. So that's another reason to edit the number of segments. Maybe you want a nice smooth bent thing on that. Let's add, so I kind of want to make this like a ram's horn or something. Well, maybe not curled like that, but I don't know, a bull's horn maybe or something. So I'm going to put a taper on this too. So tapers and the T's, there's the taper. And in the Z, so I just put a negative amount, so it tapers inward. And you can see it pinching, but I kind of wanted to, well, what's happening anyway, it's not what I was hoping to do. I wanted it to taper first, right? So what's happening is it's bending it and then tapering it. But you can adjust that just like layers in Photoshop. I can drag that taper layer before I get to the bend, and now it's being tapered and then bent, right? So now I can taper that to a sharper point. Not too much because, right? So now I have a taper and a bend that I can work with. That'd be good for a Viking helmet, maybe. Is that working for everybody? Is if you're following along or playing along, you don't really have to, but you know, just getting the feel for these modifiers and playing with it. Just demonstrating a few things. Okay, let's add another one. Sometimes it's useful to create geometry out of the edges, right? And the internal structure of it can be used to show, and that's called, I can use a lattice modifier for that. Let's look at that one. That's a little too big, so so it becomes struts and joints. So if I change the size of these, the radius is a little bit too high, so let's go 0.2. And the joints are also kind of too big. So the radius, let's put that at 0.2 also. There we go. So I can see that these, I've made like this cage out of it, and that is renderable. Normally the edges, you just can't see them. They're just internal structure, but now I'm using this object to create some sort of lattice structure for it, right? Let's put the struts or the edges basically down to 0.1. And so it's a little bit smaller. And I can see now the little joints are these little tetrahedrons. Now I can increase the octahedron, sorry. I can increase the number of segments for these, and then they become more spherical, right? Like a geosphere. So that might look a little better if I do something like that. And then also I can do the same thing. I'm zooming too far here. See, the struts are these, they're four-sided, right? So I can change the number of sides to like 12 or something, and now they're cylindrical-ish. And if I hit F4, I might get a better picture of what that looks like, and then deselect it. And that might tell me a little bit better of what it looks like. Yeah, the tip is still, I might have to do something with that to fix that, but maybe not. And of course, I can come back down and increase the number of segments. So I have 18 sides on this. Let's go 32. And height segments, maybe some more. So I can get a smoother cage looking structure this way. I don't know why I would do that, but for a smoother cage. So far, so good. Any questions up to here? Okay, we'll come around. Oh, let me pause this. We'll come around and answer individual questions and stuff too. So yeah, let's say I want to move this horn on top of like a helmet or something, right? So maybe the helmet would be a sphere. So let's pick a sphere. I'll just use a regular sphere. And relatively speaking, I guess, something like that, I guess. So, okay. Now I want to make sure that that's lined up with it or whatever, right? So I could just certainly grab this, get my move tool, and then just click and drag that, right? So just kind of line it up like that. But the problem is, in the perspective view, that's very difficult to line up. See, I just moved it like really far away, and it looked like it was lined up, but looking at the other viewports is helpful in realizing where the stuff is, right? So just a couple moves, right? So using the left viewport or even the top viewport, right? So in the top viewport, just put it on top of there, and that gets it pretty close. And then maybe the front or the left viewports can tell me where I can go from there, right? So maybe I want to put it inside that for a little bit. Okay. So better, right? So now it looks like a Smurf mohawk or something. Okay. So maybe I want do some other things. Maybe I want a couple of them, right? So I want one on one side, one on the other or whatever, and not right on top there. So that's just using my other viewports to line that up. That makes a huge difference in being able to line things up. There's some other tools you can do. So I'm just going to go back to where it was over here. And with that, I want to introduce the align tool. There's a tool that can kind of take care of a lot of this in a couple steps. So with the horn selected, I guess we're going to name this horn now. There's horn. Actually, horn 1, because I might have more than one. Okay, so there's a mirror tool and a line tool. I don't use the mirror tool near as much, but the align tool I use quite a bit because I can align that horn with the helmet in an interface, right? So I'll click the align tool with the horn selected. That's the object I want to move, right? So with the object you want to move selected, in other words, I'll click the align tool and then nothing happens, but it down there at the bottom, it's going to prompt you to click on the target object or the what you want to move to or align with, right? So I click on the sphere. And by default, so now I get a little dialog box popping up that by default goes center to center. Well, actually, not even that. It's pivot point to pivot point. And what's that, right? So the pivot point of an object is it's defined by the standard object that you make, right? And so it depends on what it is. But for a cylinder, it's at the center of the base, but I don't really see that happening right now because it's a little off. But if I want to, I could use, well, and in the X, Y, and Z position. So there's actually quite a bit of adjustment I can make on this. So let's say I did want it, well, pivot point to pivot point, and that'll put it, and I can see in the other viewports that that centers them. That puts the bottom of the horn at the center of the sphere. That's a good start, but that's not exactly where I want to go. So I'm going to click apply, and that turns off the X, Y, and Z. So now I'm interested in the Z, right? So I click on Z, and this time I want the pivot point, or even the minimum, the bottom of the object, to be lined up with the top of the sphere. Although I'm in the wrong viewport for that because it's by the view, right? Screen. So it's coming in and out of the screen, not my perspective. So I guess that would be the Y instead of the Z. So uncheck that and put it in the Y. So now, instead of moving it in and out of the screen, it's moving it up and down, which is kind of annoying, but that put the horn directly on top of the sphere. The minimum part of the horn is now at the top, or the maximum part of the horn, the ball or the helmet, in the Y direction. That would be the up and down direction in that view anyway. So you got to pay attention to which view you're in, not only the view, but the objects themselves and where their pivot points are and stuff. But in this case, I just use minimum and maximum to line them up top to bottom.
On mine, when I go to X position, it lines up. When I go to Y position,
Okay. So so my question is, which view are you is active? And how can you tell which view is active anyway?
I let us square around the viewport.
Yeah, you get that yellow or goldish colored highlighting border on the. So what's highlighted for you?
I'm in the bottom
Yeah, the left one, right?
right, right corner.
Oh, the right corner. That's the perspective. So in your case, I would use the Z because the Z is actually up and down in that view. One way to get away from that, so I'm going to cancel that. So it goes back to where it was. I'm going to activate that view. I could make sure that I'm in that view. So Z is up and down. Or instead of my reference coordinate system up here, and this is all about moving and aligning and stuff. If I change that to world, then Z is always in the Z direction in 3ds Max's world. In this 3D world, Z is always up and down off the floor, if you want to call it that. So it doesn't matter which view I'm in. I should be able to align my object, and there it goes. And then I click apply, and now I just pick Z, minimum to maximum, and it goes on top now because Z is vertical, regardless of what view you're in. So now you can avoid worrying about which view you're in if you keep it on world, if that makes sense. So that becomes pretty useful too. So good question. Did it work? Did you get it?
Yes.
Okay, nice. Okay, so that's the align tool for the most part. Sometimes you can align the orientation. Well, you always can, but sometimes you want to. Okay, so let's say I'm done with that. So the other thing was I want to lower that a little bit, right? Because I want it to be inside of the. So I'm going to lower that until the edges of the cone or the cylinder are at least sort of inside the sphere, so that gets kind of hidden. So it looks better, although it's kind of hard to tell with this wireframe thing. Anyhow, I'm going to use my front viewport to do the next thing. Or no, I'm going to use the left viewport for this. Like I said, I didn't really want actually front. So I just hit F on the keyboard. So I want that to be like now it's going to be a court jester's hat. And I want that curved horn to be off to the side, right? Rotated over, right? So there's a couple ways I could do that. I could just hit E on the keyboard or click on the chunk button up there and rotate it, right? But you notice how it rotates right about its point. So I'd have to rotate it and then go back to the move tool and then move it over here. And then, well, it's not quite rotated right. And then I have to do that and then move it again. And that's, you know, all well and good, I guess. I could get it there, but there's an easier way. So I'm just going to undo all that to get it back to here. What if I rotate it about the sphere? I mean, shouldn't I be able to do that? Okay, so that's kind of where we changed the world. So this time I'm going to change it based on pick, right? So I can actually click on an object to be the coordinate system center, right? My reference coordinate system is going to be actually the sphere. Okay, that in and of itself doesn't really do anything, but it does tell me sphere 01 is my coordinate system reference. Okay, so now when I go to rotate, it does the same thing, right? So it's not much. But if I change right next to that where it says view, rotate, world, or whatever, and I should be on sphere 1. Oh yeah, it changes by the tool you have too. So I change to the rotate tool. I have to change this back, but I already have that listed. So sphere 1 is in that list now. So I choose sphere 1 and it still doesn't do anything, but the item or option right next to that coordinate system reference is how you transform something. And there's 3 items, right? One is about the item's own pivot. The second one is about the selection geometric center of all the selected objects. The third one is about the coordinate system center. And that would be the sphere. So that's the one I want. I'll demonstrate that a little bit more later. But now we can see the gizmos right at the center of the sphere, huh? So now when I rotate, it just rotates around that sphere. Isn't that lovely? Right? Do we want to see that again or what?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, good.
It's like locked out on the top.
Okay, let me pause it. You know, one thing I could do is hold the shift key down, right? Remember when you move something and hold the shift key down at the same time, what happens? It makes it what?
Everything you can.
Everything. It makes a copy, right? So I'm just going to hold the shift and move, right? See, it makes a copy. And that looks just great. But I really do want the horn to kind of face the other way. So how am I going to do that, right? Well, glad you asked. Glad I asked. So I want to rotate it, but not about the sphere anymore, but about its own local coordinate system. So I go local. And now the gizmo, let me turn it around here. I'm in the front view. So yeah, the perspective viewport is actually pretty indicative of what's going on here. See that gizmo there? If I unshade it, it's not going to help. That gizmo allows me to, that's not it. Where's my gizmo? Yeah, there's the gizmo part I want. So now I can just rotate it about its own Z coordinate. Do that. Not only that, well, I want it actually right at 180 degrees. So I'm going to turn on the angle snap. So that'll snap to 5-degree increments, or you can change it by right-clicking on it and change the snap angle from 5 to like 90 if you want, right? So I can leave that up. And so now when I rotate it, see it snaps to 90. So there's 90, 180. Okay, that's probably not a great one to be snapping to. So 5 degrees is okay. That was the default. So when I rotate it 5, 10, 15, 20, all the way to, and I can barely see it, but I can see it down in my Z coordinate down in the bottom of my, what do you call it? The status bar down there. So there's negative 180 and there's positive 180. There, right? So right click on these snaps, go to the settings for those. So you can control your snaps. It's pretty good. Admire it for a while and then go on, right? Just kidding. Okay, any questions on that? Give that a try. Let's have, yeah, go ahead and try it. We'll pause again. All right, let's undo that so we can see what. Okay, so if I want to rotate multiple objects, maybe this would be a little easier to show in some other, like a teapot, right? So let's make several teapots here. So I'll just move. Hold the shift key down. I'll make 3 extras. Select them all. Move them this way. Make 3 more. Okay, that'll work. There's actually a tool to do this as well, instead of doing it and just moving like that. I'll show you that later. Okay, so I'm going to select them all. And let's say I want to rotate them, right? So if I rotate them, they're all rotating about their own pivots. Isn't that neat? And that's because I have it on pivot. If I rotate them all about their selection center locally, that may do the same thing. Let's change it to world. And now they're just going to rotate about their selection center. But regardless of whether it's on local or not, if I put it at their own pivot points, they're still going to rotate about their own pivots. What else is there? Oh, rotated about the world. I don't know where the 0 is. It's way over here, right? So now it's going to rotate about the center of the world, right? Or, right, I still have the sphere, right? So I can rotate it about the sphere. That makes sense? Okay. All right. Before I talk more about snapping and stuff, I don't think we've given it enough justice. When you make something, I could have started with, like, to make these horns, I could have used a cone, right? And then, but I want to put the cone right on the sphere. So I can use an auto grid and it recognizes the surface. See how that works? See, that's wherever I am on that sphere, I can create the cone and it lines it up with the face of that. So I click and that's like a cylinder, and then I move my mouse one more time and I can just pinch it down. So really the horn would have been way better as a cone in the first place, but whatever. Right. So we can make a little snubby nose, give it more height segments. We'll put a bend on it. Oh, just turn on. Yeah. So the question is, how do you do that? Just turn on auto grid. And what auto grid does is it recognizes where the cursor is and lines up the local coordinate system to whatever face it's over. And if it's not over a face, it'll line it to the world. Is that okay? So it's kind of complicated, but works well. All right, let's add a bend modifier here. There we go. Negative 90. There. So that's a little beak. Okay, probably want to use my left viewport to move it. Move it inside the sphere a little bit so we get that. Okay. All right. Let's delete these teapots. That was just to show the rotate tool kind of. What else? I'll show you that array tool. Okay, let's say, let's just make let's go to extended primitives. So these are just the standard objects, right? Like a teapot, that's a standard object. That's in every household almost. Maybe not. Anyway, extended primitives go further. So there's oil tank, Hedra, torus knot. Those are fun. Let's just do a torus knot. There's a nice one. There we go. And then you can change its P and Q parameters to increase the, yeah, you probably have to have like relatively even values to make that work right. And then up the number of segments to make that smooth. And then now I have a nice little, I don't know, P wave thing. Okay, so there's a nice little knot. And I like it so much that I want lots of copies of it, right? So the array tool is what I want to use, but it's not up here, right? So it's actually, I'm going to right click in the in a blank part of my toolbar up here. And I have some other toolbars I can play with. And one of them is extras. I go to extras, and that's a real small toolbar here, but one of them's array, right? So with that selected, click array. Now you can have a rectangular array in X, Y, and Z, a 3D array, and we'll click on preview to see what's going on. Right now, I don't know what it's doing. Oh yeah, it's making 10 in one direction, right? So I would offset that in like the Y direction. I can move that over, zoom out. Or maybe I'd want to do it in the X direction, right? So there's the X direction. Get them far enough apart so I can see them. There we go. Okay. But not only that, but I'm going to overlap them just a little bit so it's hard to see. And then I'm going to go to 2D array and set up, that was X, so I'm going to increase the Y direction. Oh, and maybe give, okay, maybe I don't want that many. So let's go 5 by 5 by 5. That's still 125 of them, right? There's 5. And now I can separate those by a little bit more, maybe about the same amount, I guess. And I still have 2 minutes. So I'm going to go 3D and go another 5. And then separate those in the Z direction. Now I get a bunch of, all right, so. Oh, it likes me. Don't worry about it. Just kidding. But yeah, it can really tax a computer. Yes, you're right. So be careful about that kind of stuff, especially when I jacked up all the, yeah, and then also I'm making instances of them, right? So if I pick one of them, go to the modify panel and jack up the number of sides of the cross section, I could really tax the computer up, right? So be careful about that. I was actually trying to crash it. That would have been a nice way to end it, but anyway. So there you go. So we have a nice little, I mean, I don't know, if you zoom in, you get a nice little bokeh pattern or something.
Add some sort of physics simulations, but
Yeah, do animated.
virtual instant on.
There you go. There you go. I think it's spaghetti, but maybe because I'm hungry. So. Okay, cool. We'll leave it at that and we'll pick this up again. We'll have an assignment probably next time. I think we're on break. If you want, if you've made something that's that you want to keep, go ahead.